I'm in the jungle. Just turn him red.
That's me.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. Great to have you here. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget you can find out more about what we do all the time on officehours.global. As every day, our first hour is a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. Second hour, we typically do a deeper dive into a topic, and today I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be discussing conducting on-camera interviews, one of the most popular content creation strategies. So that is our second hour. The first hour, we're going to deal with your questions. And don't forget, you can ask as many questions as you like through the Mukana interface in the back, and we encourage you to do so. This show is driven by what you want to talk about, and we spend the most time on the highest rated questions, and you are the raters. So when you see those questions in the interface, make sure you vote on the ones you want to see discussed most at length, and we'll dive into those. So, Alex, what have we got today?
Our first question is from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. And Andy asks, what is the difference between an electronic camera shutter and global shutter? Which is better and why?
Alex, you want to handle this?
It's really a rolling shutter or a global shutter are both electronic shutters. So a global shutter is part of that assembly, and so when you have what you had before was a mechanical shutter, which is something that was actually turning that would let you get from frame to frame. Otherwise, you'd see the frame moving. so there has to be some time when the frame isn't opened or when the shutter wasn't open. So there was a shutter, and when we moved the frame, we had to have some time it was closed, and so typically it was closed half the time to give it. Now in military ones in World War II, you'll notice they're a little bit more stuttery because 3/4 of the time it was closed to give it more time to get from one frame to the next between those frames. So that shutter was what controlled it. Now we're not limited by that now. We can have an electronic shutter. It could stay open the whole time, and it can actually go from frame to frame to frame without, it's never moving the frame. So you never see that there, a blur that would happen that's there. So they have an electronic shutter. Now there's two different ways of doing that. That's a rolling shutter, which is that it charges the entire sensor at one time, which is much harder to do and much more expensive to execute, or a rolling shutter where it scans the whole thing down as fast as it can throughout that frame. The problem with the rolling shutter is that if your camera is shaking a lot, everything will wiggle because it didn't get to that part of the frame before it moved. So rolling shutters, which is a lot of cameras out there, a lot of consumer cameras, the Blackmagic cameras, those are all rolling shutters. Bigger film cameras like Aries and a couple other ones that will have what's called a global shutter, and that's what you're looking for if you're going to deal with a lot of camera movement. The rolling shutter is fine for 90% of the work that you would do, not fine for the other 10. So, and all you have to do to see that is take your iPhone. Your iPhone's a rolling shutter. Take it. Just take it in your car and just stick it out the window and just let it go like this, capture some footage, and you'll see this wavy thing that's going on, and that's your rolling shutter. But it's not a matter of electronic shutter. Both a rolling shutter and a global shutter are electronic shutters. There's no physical piece moving in there. But the global shutter is one where it's grabbing the entire frame at one time.
I've heard the term Jello effect applied.
Yeah, I think the technical term for it is Jello vision.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's how you can tell. But good explanation. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Nick Batt in the UK, and Nick asks, what is the basic minimum Blackmagic camera to add to an ATEM HDMI to get the cam control and other benefits on a budget?
Alex, you want to deal with this one too?
Yeah, I think that the 4K or even the micro cinema is probably the least expensive version that has an HDMI, but I don't know. I think you have to have SDI to actually control it. I don't think it'll control through the HDMI. The HDMI is simple output. So I think the least expensive one is the Blackmagic 4K as far as an HDMI control back to the camera. Remember, you can use any Blackmagic SDI camera by having a bidirectional converter from HDMI to SDI, and that'll have two SDIs that would go into that Blackmagic camera with SDI. And so if you get something used, you could do that. Almost every Blackmagic camera made in probably the last 5 or 6 years are all able to be driven from the ATEM Mini. A lot of us have, I'm on a 6K right now. A lot of us have 4Ks and 6Ks. They're probably the easiest ones to control as far as that, and probably the least expensive in the group that you're looking for.
Let's move on to the next question.
Next question is from Andy Kokendorfer and in Vieira, Florida. And Andy asks, is there a Sony consumer camera that will output Rec 2020 via HDMI? I would like to experiment with Rec 2020, but my Sony A6500 is limited to Rec 709.
Sony is notorious for having extraordinarily low light performance, but this is Rec 2020, which is high dynamic range that you're looking for. I'm not sure that if Rec 2020 comes out HDMI. I might be wrong about that, but I think I'm not sure if the HDMI standard as it currently exists can handle that extra luminance bandwidth. It might be able to, and I might be wrong. I'm not a Sony guy, so I don't have a lot of experience with that. And I don't know the class of the A6500 camera. Generally speaking, things like Rec 2020 doesn't hit the consumer side of cameras really early. It's one of those things that starts out on professional cameras and then kind of works its way down into the consumer areas. Alex, do you have additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to experiment with it and you want to capture it, capturing it live can be a little tricky, but if you want to experiment with this, what you need is a LUT that's going to convert your footage to a certain curve. If you have a 10, and I don't know, I have this little FX30 here, and it just arrived yesterday. So this little guy here. So I'll be doing some tests, with this, but basically the thing is, if you have a 10-bit output and you apply a curve, whether it's an HLG curve or a PQ curve, that can be stretched back out into HDR. So and into that Rec 2020 color space. So what you want to look at there is applying the right LUT to it, and then having it going out of the HDMI. The HDMI should be able to handle 10-bit. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter as much. It is it's just the basic PQ curve without all of the trims that you could apply to it as a LUT or an HLG LUT, and then that would get it out there. It's not going to be tagged that way, but you could take that information, as long as you haven't lost it, out of the camera, and then apply another LUT to get it to where what you're trying to do. And log, of course, log would do it as well.
Yeah, Filipe.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering here. Yeah, I was just wondering here. For example, my Sony A1 outputs 10-bit 422, and it outputs HLG as well, which is Rec 2020.
Okay, so there is great. A Sony pathway.
So that's a Sony camera. And how much does that cost?
That's the one that's $6,500.
Yeah.
To my point, so yeah. When generally these features,
once you get above $5,000, you can. And which camera is that again? Sorry,
that's the A1.
Oh, the A1. Yeah,
50 megapixel, 8K recording up to 30 frames.
Yeah, and I'm going to be testing what I can do with this. This is an FX30 that I'm going to be playing with in the next little bit of time. So we'll take a look at that. As soon as you start getting into the FX3, FX6, the A1, those should all be able to do at least an HLG. And HLG is kind of like HDR light. so it's a lot easier to go through pipelines and so on and so forth. So, but you should make it work. And again, if you capture in log from any of these cameras, you're going to be able to correct that into a Rec 2020 space. So, that's going to capture that information, because what's happening is when you do a log, if you think about the highlights, here, and the log is going to, protect like this. It's going to protect all those highlights there. In 8-bit, this would all fall apart. But when it gets, when you actually, when it gets stretched back out, when you're pulling all these highlights that were there back up, into that area this is a very simplified curve, but you're able to pull that back up and get all that highlights that were protected by this kind of soft log curve that you have there. So you should be able to capture log and then re-stretch it. And we do that a lot. I mean, log is the easiest way to capture from a camera, and then stretch it back out into any HDR format that you want to, from HLG all the way up to Vision.
Andy, I don't know if it's out there right now, but the hope is for the future pretty strong, because as they increase the power of the chips they're putting in all these cameras, that's part of, we've seen this evolution from the days of the original DSLRs that had Digic chips and things like that could handle video frame rates. Those chips have gotten more and more and more powerful. We're seeing more and more processing on board on the camera. That bodes well for a future where things like HLG and these things are going to be processed by even the low-end cameras. I'm not sure it's there entirely yet, but keep your fingers crossed and keep looking around and make sure that that's one of the features you look for. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. And Guy asks, what are you most excited to see at the NAB 2023 conference?
And the answer, all of our friends, is a good answer. But John Freda, what are you looking forward to?
You just stole my punchline, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was off the cuff.
I'm excited to see Guy, and I'm excited to see Filipe and Alex and Chris Fedwick, and the whole. We got a big gang coming, so it's going to be exciting to see everyone.
I've said forever and ever, and before Alex makes his longer comment, that in the beginning you think NAB or these conferences are about seeing things, and then you immediately start understanding it's not about seeing things. It's about meeting people and forming relationships with people. That's really what it's all about, Alex.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty epic gathering. so I think that I'm pretty excited to see everybody there. I think we're going to have a lot of fun there. We're going to do a lot of shooting. And so what's fun about it, for me, the easiest way to socialize, and everybody has their own way of doing it, but is to do things with people. So going there and covering the event is just a fun way to get to know everybody that we haven't seen in person before. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun there. I think we're going to shoot some good, interesting things. And so we're really looking forward to it. I'm going to keep on tracking cameras, where Blackmagic's going. I think that Sony, is really hitting on all cylinders when it comes to their cameras. And so I'm really interested to see what they do there, see what Ross comes up with. And then a lot of times it's wandering through and just looking for lots of little things that fix things that you didn't even know needed to be fixed. That's the real thing with NAB, is you'll see things and they built a tool for something you didn't even know was a problem. And so there'll be a lot of learning there. We are going to put out an epic amount of shorts and videos, as well as doing live streams from there. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm feeling of two minds. Alex and I talked, and I have decided to stay here and kind of form
We're very grateful that Bill's willing to take one for the team, because we needed somebody. I was like, we're going to be gone. We need someone to helm this. It's going to be very complicated. We need you, Bill. We need you in San Diego.
But every time I think I'm not going, and I've been there 30 years, I'm not going. But so I'm counting on each and every one of you who are on the field team to bring the experience back to me so I can. And
your job is to keep on sending requests. We have to think of some way to do requests. I think that's like, we're going to cover a lot of things, but we should figure out a way that people can put in requests. Like, we really want to see this booth. Maybe that's a Mukana on its own, where it's just people just requesting things that they'd like us to go see. Because what I do a lot of times, I have to admit, I get up in the morning and they have this big paper that comes out, and you get it in your hotel if you bought it if you bought the hotel room through NAB. You get this little thing outside your hotel room. Otherwise, you get it. You can just go to the NAB to get it. And what's cool is you go through and you see what all the ads are, and they tell you what all the new stuff is. And so, by the way, it's probably the most valuable advertising space in NAB is that newspaper, because you open it up. I open it up and I just circle things, and I circle this is in booth this and this and this. And so we'll probably do that every morning and figure out what we're going to go see. So, but we should find some requests. It'd be great.
Yeah, there's also, I should note, an NAB app. So download the app. Particularly, I actually used to just take my phone, but I started taking an iPad that was a little bit bigger, because the maps to the booth and things like that exist in their electronic app as well. So you can often plan, like, who's next to me, zoom in a little bit on the area and get a bird's eye view that way. So that's often a tool that is useful. All right, we're looking forward to our NAB coverage. It starts on, what is it, April 16th?
I think it's April 16th, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll be comprehensive coverage. We'll be talking about it the week before, covering it live on the scene, and then having a lot of discussions about it afterwards, those days of the actual show, plus I would imagine for days to come. So right here on Office Hours, let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. And Andy asks, how do you socialize an upcoming virtual conference to maximize the number of attendees?
David Paskin.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, presence. When I go to Sage events, they send me cool water bottles and stuff. And at Zoomtopia, this is one of my favorites, I got a little whale that I got to build and put together myself. And it took me all day. But these things are like, this is cute. This is fun stuff. It takes a virtual event, a digital event, and it makes it feel a little more real.
There's a word for that in the industry, swag. We're always looking for the cool swag from the conferences, and that one's brilliant. Yeah, engage with it.
Alex? Oh God, wait, it just broke.
Wait.
Hold on.
Google was notorious for sending out those things, and I got, because I was working on all these Google events, I got a lot. I had a stack of them, and they just drove me crazy, because it was like, oh, this is going to take way too long for me to put this together. I can't expend the time that's necessary to put this little thing together. It looks simple, but I knew it was going to be complicated. The thing that I would say is that building a community around what you want the conference to be is really the key to the operation. So what you want to do is think about lots of small events. A lot of times what we think about is how do I do my event? But it's really how do I create, something that's going to gather people so that I know where they are and get, are they going to show up? So one of the things you want to think about is if you have, these what we would consider tent poles. This is your big event. It might happen once a year. It might happen somewhere else. And what you want to think about is what are the little events that you can put in here that are going to tie them together and tie that community together. And if you can do something like Discord, if you can do something like, bringing people in, allowing them to start having these conversations potentially every day. You don't have to do an everyday show like we do, but you can have people able to have small things, but maybe once a week, once a month before your event, you have group sessions. And think about the more I see multi-track, and I've said this before, once I saw a single track being TED, I never wanted to see a multi-track event again. Like I hate multi-tracks. And so if you're doing a conference, think about taking all those tracks and putting them before and after the conference, specifically before the conference. So take the tracks with all the smaller things. So think of, let's say you have 6 tracks. Think of the best talk from each one of those tracks. That's what's going to be in the conference, and then all the other ones that build up towards that are in weekly or daily or monthly things that happen before that. So people can have those conversations and you give people the opportunity to really spend time on it, but it means that everybody can go to all the sessions if they wanted to. Nothing's overlapped. You don't have any FOMO. You can just simply cover that stuff. And so, I think that where we're going, and a lot of people are thinking about this at the largest companies. When I was at SVB talking about this, people came up to me afterwards as soon as I said that, and they were like, "Oh, we're all trying to figure this out." And which is a conference. The next generation of conferences will probably be 2 or 3 months long, and they will culminate at the end or 2/3 into it with a physical event. And that physical event may be global, digital first event that happens both physically and all over the world at the same time. And that will create the energy that you want. But you're going to have a lot of other discussions. And then it's so much more powerful than what we've been doing. We're living in a tiny little box that was created because we were limited by time and space.
Words of wisdom. Not to go back, but swag from things. My favorite piece of swag, little teeny tiny Adirondack chair that has the client's name on it. And it's a phone holder. So when your phone gets overheated, you can give it a little rest, but it made a little pile of sand on your desk.
I will say if you're going to do swag, and I think Blue does it really well because he figures out how to do it. The problem is that doesn't bring more people in. That just makes everybody really happy. It's a surprise and delight moment for the people who showed up. Now, when you see another one from Blue, you know what to expect, and so that I think that helps down the road for those kinds of things. I will say that I watch a lot of what Blue does there. I used to be my job to send swag out, like to design the swag for Sony Music for my region, and it was a lot of fun, and you can get a lot of things done. My most popular swag was there was a band called Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and I made a dustbin with the Ned's logo on it, like a nuclear, warning and Ned's logo, and I put it on the side. Every radio station I went to had it, like when I sent it out, every time I walked into that radio station. And it looked like they hadn't just put it out for me. It was full of trash, and so I think that, if you really think about how to really tie that swag truly into don't send any backpacks. Like we all have a lot of backpacks, I don't even know what to do. I don't even have kids to give them to anymore. I mean, I have, my kids all have the backpacks that somebody gave me. And so, anyway, but think about how to really tie it in, not an automatic something, but something that really means something to someone, like the Adirondack chair or the little whale. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, it's a cool part of the industry, and NAB is swag central. Anyway, let's move on to the next question.
Next question is from David Paskin in Miami, Florida, and David asks, has anyone played with the EasyCast beta?
And Alex,
have you played with it, David? Have you gotten a chance to?
I'm signed up. I've downloaded it. I'm a little afraid to open it, only because I feel like it's above me and beyond.
I think it's pretty simple. Let's see if we can get a lab with Elle and see if they can work through it with us. Because I think that it would be it'd be great for some of us who have access to the beta to play with it. I think I have it, but I was like, in the same boat with you. I was like, I got to think about this a little bit. I can't remember whether Elle had asked me if I had it or not. It's been a really busy couple of weeks for me. But
he did put in Discord an invitation. So if anyone's interested, you can go to the Office Hours Discord.
Perfect. Sounds good.
And don't forget, everybody, it is your questions that drive the show. I'm really excited today because there are a lot of votes on a lot of questions. I see bigger numbers than I have seen in a while. So you are paying attention to what we were asking you to do, which is voting the questions up or down, and also submitting questions. And we appreciate that. You can submit them for the first hour or the second hour. Just go through Mukana and find the place, put your questions in, and that is going to drive the rest of the show run. But anyway, thank you. We appreciate your always being the driving force behind Office Hours every day. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. And Gordon asks, is there a quality difference between the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro and the Blackmagic Studio Camera 6K Pro?
I don't think there's any quality difference. I think the sensors are exactly the same. There's a bit difference in terms of form factor. The studio camera obviously is meant for not so much run and gun shooting, but studio camera, it's got an additional set of accessories that kind of enable that, like the viewfinders and things like that. But I'm not sure that the chips are any different. Alex, do you have any additional?
I think the chips are identical. It's just convenience. One is built to be more as a studio, and one is built to be something. But I think Bill's right. The studio camera and the 6K should be identical chips.
Yeah, if you need things like the tally indicators and the little extra comms, it makes it easier to set up a headset. That's what really a studio camera will do. If you have an operator out in the studio, you want those little features without running a lot of extra equipment. And the studio camera is kind of designed to fulfill that function. Whereas the regular Blackmagic 6K camera is the same DSLR form factor, although slightly larger than most DSLRs. And then the typical use in the field is to outfit it with cages and rigs to allow you extra capacity. So it can operate as a desktop kind of studio camera, but it's more meant to be taken out in the field. The studio camera would, I think, be a little uncomfortable for run and gun shooting. So,
and you'll find that chips change very slowly and cameras change very quickly because making new chips is hard. So it's really complicated. So usually you get into a chip and Sony's been making the same chip that people use for a decade. So it definitely, chip fabs are really, really complicated to do, but changing the feature set is much faster.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question is from David Paskin in Miami, Florida. And David asks, for a low budget install, think church or temple, would you recommend a couple Insta360 links closer to stage or insist on spending the money on a more traditional PTZs mounted in the back?
Alex, what are your thoughts?
I would recommend more traditional PTZs mounted in the front. So that would be my opinion. So a lot of times you want to think about you may have a back shot. The problem is that the back shot is really not very compelling, and you'll find that your average view time doesn't maintain very well when you're on those long shots there. One thing you might want to think about is that if you have, if you think about some version of, you have pews, you have a sanctuary. It depends on whether you're having more of a square thing or whether it's more in the round. But think of someone sitting up here. What you really need is something over here that's going to get them here. Oftentimes, something over here if they're walking, and you can cover them, and then you might have that back coverage shot. But if you can get those on those wings, you can get some kind of dramatic shots. The shot that looks really nice when someone's at a podium or anything else is kind of a profile shot of them where the background is out of focus, and there's just and it kind of creates this heaviness, or not heaviness, but important, kind of feel to it. It has a very cinematic feel to it. So getting that kind of it's one of the few places I use profiles is when a speaker is at a location that I know they're not going to move. I try to get over to a profile where I'm really looking at it, and I want to have this kind of soft depth of field. The team that worked on the reason I got into it was the team that worked on I think it was one of the elections, and they were shooting stuff with Michelle Obama, and they were just shooting these profiles of her. If you go back and try to find Michelle Obama talking during the 2016 election, I think, and they just got these incredible profiles of her talking that just had this weight to it that I started adding to a lot of shows, and I found that it was a really really, really useful. So the problem with the links is they really don't go very far. They're really a home thing. They're going to go like 3 feet. 3 or 4 feet is about the optimum for those links. So you're going to need longer lenses. I will say that in the events that we're using right now and that we're doing, we're renting more and more often. We're renting Noah's FR7s down in LA. I love them. So the FR7s are great. They're a little expensive, a little pricey to put into things, but they look amazing in these environments. I wouldn't put them in the back of the room, but on those wings, they look amazing. Yeah.
I don't know if this is anything close to what you're talking about, but that's a shot from one of my examples of lighting, and the fact that it really does add a certain something to have someone talking in profile and you get close to them. It's a look.
Yeah.
Right. David Paskin. David.
That's an absolutely fascinating way to think about this. I had never thought about having PTZs on the sides. The most places that I've been talking to, what they're trying to do is not have technology in the way, in front. So that's why they put the PTZ in the back, and then they get the 20 or 30x zooms so that they can zoom into the clergy on both sides. And so what I've suggested to a couple of them who really can't spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on a PTZ or 7 or 8 on an FR7 is to get a little tiny gooseneck. These Insta360s are so small. Get a gooseneck, put it on the end of your podium, put the PTZ there, and then it is about 3 feet from you. And if you do move, it hypothetically could still follow you. But I love the idea of having the PTZs on the sides.
Yeah, and I think that you have to decide how important that online audience is where you decide to put them. In these kind of environments, I almost always use PTZs, and the reason for that, it's just where we put them. And I try to get pretty aggressive. It is a big investment at first, but it's a lower investment from a labor perspective down the road, and it's a lot less distracting. You don't have camera operators that are up front and moving around, and so I think that it's a lower hit down the road. And even if you get something, I mean, the hard part is that and the other ones that I would look at, they're probably in the ballpark, maybe are the Canon 500 series, are less expensive than the FR7s, but still have a really great chip in them. I haven't gotten to use it, but I've talked to people who are really happy with those as well. But it's like $5,000 a unit, not $10,000 or $12,000 a unit. And they're small and easy to use. And so I think that those are things to look at. I'm not that excited about PTZs that are below that because the chips start to get pretty small. And that profile shot that I was talking about does not work if it's not out of focus. So if you can't have a large enough sensor to drop that background out of focus, it's a horrible shot. Like it's just a disaster of a shot, And so now that you may, with the link, if you get it just right and you're zooming in on someone and there's enough distance back there, you may still get that depth of field. But it's super important to separate them if you're going to try to get that. Otherwise, it's just everything's in focus and it's just very confusing.
That was a good discussion of that. Hopefully, David, that was what you were looking for. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris asks, thoughts on the new Tiny 2?
I'm not sure I know what the Tiny 2 is. David Paskin, can you help us?
Yeah, it's the one that Alex had a fit about yesterday, which was fantastic, by the way. Just best 10 minutes of the show. So yeah, the Tiny 2, it was finally released today. It's the follow-up to the OBSBot 4K. It is smaller, not only than the old OBSBot 4K, but even than the Insta360. It's lighter than that, and it's got all the same kind of functionality. They have done some work on the software, and I know that Alex, you and I both, we love the Insta360 stuff. They've done some good work on that. It's not as good, but they've done some good work. The wide field of vision doesn't make a lot of sense. The reason that I would maybe consider it is actually going back to the question we just talked about, is if I wanted to use it in a not on a desk. But it's out. It's 370, 380, I think. It's interesting. We'll have to take a look at it.
Alex?
I don't think it's competitive with the, to be honest, I just don't think that it, unless you really, really want all the AI tools that they have built into it, and the Insta360 does some of those as well, I don't think that they hit the mark. I think that it's the software is really, really important. And I don't think that they nailed that. So I think that it's going to be challenging, and that wider field of view does not make sense for 90% of the audience. So I think they had to get this camera out, because I'm pretty sure that in talking to people around that I work with, the Insta360 was just annihilating them. I'm not from a market perspective, but I think that they didn't focus enough on the field of the focal length is really a deal. I don't know anybody that's using focal lengths longer. Wider than the Insta360, and they made it wider, and it just means that you're throwing away a lot of pixels to do what you're trying to do.
David, you wanted to come back?
I just want to say, for what it's worth, OBSBot was first to market with their original little PTZ, which was kind of revolutionary when they came out with it before Insta got around and made it a whole lot better.
All right, let's go to the next question.
Next question is from David Paskin. And David asks, of all the recent AI announcements and releases, what do you think long-term will be the most impactful?
Somebody on our team who spends a lot of time in the AR weeds is John Preto. John?
This is a tough one. This is like, the invention of the internet or the invention of the smartphone, mobile phones. Same sort of paradigm is happening now with AI. However, I think it's the medical breakthroughs that are going to happen. DeepMind had OpenFold, their AlphaFold program that did the protein sequences from folding into 3D structures. That's huge breakthrough in medical. And all the stuff that's going on in the medical industries. I watched some of the things on NVIDIA, and it's amazing what's going to happen in the medical industry. So I'm most excited about what's going on there.
That sounds pretty interesting. Alex, your thoughts?
I think that I've really been paying attention a lot to the fluidity of, number one, the fluidity of learning. Robert Scoble interviewed me at the there was a meetup for generative AI. I didn't really realize I was going to get interviewed. I was supposed to be interviewing other people, but he didn't. So it's on Twitter, and so you can talk. I talked a little bit about it, but one of the things that I really think about is this conversation. I want a recipe. I want it for this many people. I don't want pasta. I want it to be authentic. I want it to be, like I can say all those things, and it just keeps rewriting that recipe until I get what I want. Same thing with Midjourney, where I can keep on just talking to it, and I eventually get something that I want. That would take a long time to do with somebody else. The other thing is just the distribution of knowledge. What we're going to see is that, you have meetings, and a lot of those meetings, it's like, okay, who's going to caption it, and how's it going to get captioned, and what is it going to do? We are less than 2 or 3 years away from a meeting happens, and it's translated into 60 languages. There's no captioning. It redubs everybody into the other languages, and it uses deep fakes to change their mouth, so it looks like they're saying what they were going to say. And you can watch the original if you want, but when you look at film dubbing, this is going to happen. People are already working on it, and the technology is already working. They're only using it. You'll see some things reach the surface, but they're using a handful of clips here and there for putting stuff out. But this is happening where you're going to see this in many languages. Their mouth is going to do what it needs to do. They're not having someone say it again. They're literally having them. It's taking the original and then it's rebuilding it in the other language. Now, oftentimes they'll have somebody speak it, as close as they can, but then it's remapping it to the original actor's voice so that it's Tom Cruise saying it every single time. But that kind of thing is going to make a lot of things a lot easier for us to distribute to a lot more people. So the speed of knowledge is going to increase exponentially every year for the next decade. So it'll do the things that John was talking about, but how fast, there's so many things that are locked up in English and locked up in Chinese and locked up in Swahili and locked up. And all of that's going to get opened up because we can make that happen much faster, and we're going to learn a lot. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. This has been like the speed of knowledge has been going like this. We've been in a hockey stick, for a long time now, but it's about to, it's just going to get very, very intense as we go forward.
Filipe.
Well, my example is not as complex as Alex's, but for example, what happened to me yesterday, I had a call. I knew that the call would be a little bit complex with a lot of subjects, and I recorded the call. Ran it through Mac Whisper, so OpenAI Whisper, and then got the transcription and threw it on GPT-4 and say, hey, can you give me 1, the email that I promised on the call, and 2, meeting minutes? Both of them came out perfectly. And it saved me hours of work right there.
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. That's really amazing.
David?
The everyday people being able to use this in everyday ways is really astonishing. This is not serious at all, but yesterday in our Canva keynote lab, we discovered that Canva has built-in AI narration. So you can upload a picture of yourself and it will, I don't have the audio turned on, but I typed words in and it animated me saying those words. Then I took an image that I generated in, help me out here.
Looks like Midjourney.
Midjourney, thank you. I'm sorry. So this is the original image over here on the right. And then I uploaded that same image and I, again, just typed some text in. Now, it's not great. It's not great, but it's a little crazy that it could make me say something. Now, one of the things we discuss is that to my eye, because it's me, it looks ridiculous. If I were to just post this somewhere and people don't know me, I think they might think it was actually me.
Well, think of those introductions that, for example, there is in Stephen Colbert, that they make a funny music making fun of something that happened. They can create this much faster and maybe even have more of those in a show, for example, as well.
Which puts more and more and more weight on the perception of authenticity and trying to figure out what is real and what is not. And our kids are going to have an interesting time coming up and through the course of their lives in terms of figuring out whether the thing they see is a real thing or a generated thing. It's going to be a challenge to society. Alex?
Yeah, I think that we are moving very quickly where audio, video, text, all of that stuff will not be admissible in court or not be really that important in court. It'll be a piece of evidence that we don't pay much attention to because we can't verify it. Like it's going to be very, very hard to verify those things. And it doesn't have to, everything about law is a confidence game, right? It doesn't, because you have a jury, so it doesn't matter whether you prove it. If juries get to a point where they just don't think that video and audio are, all you have to do is poke a hole in it. The defense just has to poke a hole in, this could have been generated and blah, blah, blah. And them just saying that will poison the jury. And so the thing is, I think that we're going to change the way evidence works. You're going to have to have a lot more evidence that comes from a lot of different directions. People are going to have to learn that they can't take anything. You can't take any video, any audio, any. People say, well, people are going to get fooled. They're only going to get fooled for a little while, and then they're just not going to believe anything that they see. And I think that that's actually pretty healthy. That they feel like, I have to actually research this. I have to see it from a couple different angles. I have to, I can't take anything on face value. I think that we've been taking things on face value for like more than a century too long, maybe a couple centuries too long, and so it's important that we, many people have been incarcerated, many people have died because we took things in face value, and so it's important that we really are careful, and this is going to create that, because you're not going to be able to believe anything that you see much longer, because everything's going to look real.
That brings up the ancillary question. This will be the last little thing, but, so could somebody create a case against you using these tools that has nothing to do with reality, and you have to spend a lot of time and effort to defend yourself against that?
You could, but the problem is that once that case happens, and if it gets poked open, the impact that it'll have on the entire legal, the all cases will be intense. So someone probably will try to do some of those things, and they'll try to submit those things. But as people do that, it's going to just make it much harder for prosecutors to get juries to believe anything, that they're looking at. And the same thing that, I never end up on juries because they ask, do you have anything that will keep you out? And I said, well, I'm going to pay a lot of attention to chain of custody, and immediately I'm dropped out of the jury pool. Because the chain of custody is a really complicated thing that no one can do well, and they know it. And so as soon as you say I want to know where that evidence has been at every moment, or I'm not going to convict somebody, that no prosecutor wants you on there. So and so the thing is that many of these systems are very imperfect, and if you poke a hole or you look a little deeper into it, it's really hard to find, make this work at all. So
It's interesting. If the Alexes of the world are never on juries, who do we face if we ever get in trouble? Anyway, it is about 20 minutes till the top of the hour, which means that I get to remind you that we have a room for a couple more questions in here. So make sure that if you have something that's not solved for today, we're looking forward to the top of the hour and our discussion of our second hour topic. But for right now, next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, Sony announced the Venice 4K Live Bundle, which packages the Venice camera with a multi-dyne silverback fiber optic camera adapter. What switcher would you probably use with a camera of this class? Could you use it with an ATEM Constellation or 4K?
Almost every camera, no matter what the class of the camera, has certain consistent outputs. So I would imagine that, yes, you could probably use any of those cameras with the Constellation if it has. Now, sometimes not all the resolution is immediately available. But Alex, what's your experience working with these higher end systems?
Yeah, we've actually done that with the Venices, and so the issue is that you're going to shade that. You're not going to shade it through the switcher. You can't shade the Sony camera with the Blackmagic switcher. So you're going to use external shading units for those cameras to control those. But you can absolutely. This is just simply allowing you to have that live feed output from the Venice, and it can go into any switcher. Really, it's going to deliver that content typically as just a baseband SDI.
Next question.
Next question is from Robin Cutshaw in Atlanta, Georgia. And Robin asks, having received an X32 rack for Christmas, wow, congratulations. I'm looking for a good tutorial. The YouTube videos I've seen don't quite do it. Thoughts on a good training source?
One of the things you could do on every Wednesday here, the audio guys come in and talk at length about these things. We've got a lot of expertise that coalesces around our Wednesday show. So consider that as an option. Alex, what are the other things?
Yeah, and I think that definitely jumping into and asking questions on Wednesdays. I also think that a lot of us are talking about putting together a lab, just a bunch of us opening up our X32s and bouncing around on them. There's so many people in this community that have X32s that I think it's probably worth us kind of talking through those things. You'll see us talking more about mixers a little later in the year. Sorry, it doesn't really solve your problem right now. But I would ask questions in Discord, ask questions on Wednesdays, and look for those things because I think that there's a lot of people here that use it, and we'll talk more about it in the near future.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, Futuri, a Cleveland-based media company, is introducing Radio GPT, which uses ChatGPT technology to replace on-air talent. Thoughts?
Soon it's going to be fast food GPT. We're going to have everything. Mark Giuliani. Hop in.
So, Douglas, this is a great question. I think a lot of it depends on the format. For music, that would be easier to bring ChatGPT into for the announcers. For news talk, I don't think we're there yet. But where we are using it in our stations is really to help the clients compete better. So we use it as marketing consultants to help them research the markets, to find their competition, to help improve their branding. We're using it on the creative side with keywords and spots. And that's how we are using the ChatGPT. In fact, it's in some of the software that we use to run the radio station already.
Interesting. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of things that you could put it, like reading the news, reading the stocks, reading the, some things that are not necessarily needed. That's where we're going to see a lot of the AI hit pretty quickly. Is there's enormous amounts of things that we don't cover, that we don't do, that we don't write about because there's the market for it is too small, and AI is just going to step into that world and suddenly start delivering huge amounts of data that we can just get and listen to. We could listen to a summary of the council meeting that happened 2 days ago in Mandarin, if we want to. And that's probably less than a year or two away. And again, this means I think there's whole radio stations that may come up in other languages to serve those markets that are simply taking the text from one. You could have a radio station that is in, let's say, Korean. It takes an American an announcer, takes the programming that's in there, and just converts all of the audio, all the spoken word in a track into Korean, and delivers that, or vice versa, And so those are the kind of things that you're going to see is this kind of blending of languages pretty quickly, where we don't have to think about. We can serve all those markets without having to have a human do it.
Next question.
Next question is from Filipe Baez in Prague, Czech Republic. Czech Republic. Is that right? Did I get that right? This is not a question, but a suggestion for NAB. Could we make a video of what's in your bag? It could be interesting to see how people pack for long days, mainly the crew that will be here to cover the event.
What a fabulous idea, Alex. What do you think?
I think it's great. We should definitely do that. Because there's a bunch of us that are pretty pattern oriented about how we pack it. So I think even showing how we pack our clothes, if we're willing to do that, and how we do all those things. A lot of us that do a lot of packing are pretty methodical about that. And what we bring as gear, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, my wife changed my life when she taught me how to roll up things for packing. It was
have you done the clothing loaf? The clothing loaf is you start folding everything over top of each other, and you fold everything into one big loaf of clothes that's super dense, and then you set it in there, and you can definitely pack a week worth of clothes. 3 or 4 days is nothing, but you can do a week worth of clothes really easily, and it'll fit into half of your carry-on, and so you can fill the other half with gear, which is what I do.
I think I'm going to remember the phrase "loaf of clothes" for the rest of my life. John Preto.
You don't carry a bag at NAB because you're going to walk 15 miles.
Oh, I think by the stuff that we're going to bring in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you definitely.
Well, actually, the tiers, how do you pack to get there, right? And then what's the subset? Wasn't there a George Carlin routine about people's stuff, and you have all this stuff in your house, and then you go on a vacation, you take a part of your stuff, and then you go on a day trip, and you take less of your stuff. That describes my life pretty well when I'm going to a trade show. Let's go to the next question.
The next question is from Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. And Eric asks, does streaming video provide an opportunity for audience-selected cutting styles, maybe even real-time AI-based cutting, or will the delivery of customized streams create too much additional bandwidth costs?
Well, that's interesting. David Paskin, what are your thoughts?
So again, I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, but on YouTube now, you can create clips. So I pulled up yesterday's show, and if I click on clip, I can tell it exactly how much, where I want to start, where I want to end. It'll create that clip, and then I can share that clip out on my own YouTube page.
Interesting. I didn't know that existed, Alex.
Yeah, I think that it's mostly, most people don't want to think that hard. So I think that's going to be the thing. But I do think you're going to be able to build potentially different shows that are AI driven that could be going out live. I think that the thing we're going to see more is more languages and more interactivity before we start making new cuts.
Yeah, it's interesting. There've been some experiments with giving audiences. I know in sports they did a little bit by giving audience access to a variety of cameras and saying cut your own show. And I think it kind of was important for a little while. I don't think it fell apart as people realized that the people who cut shows, things like sporting events, have so much experience and understand what is the right angle to show people when there's a broken play, to help them understand why the play fell apart and things like that.
And also, there's a lot of reasons we cut to things, and not always because it's the best angle. Sometimes it's because something broke, something isn't working, something isn't, like, we're cutting around problems the time. So when you're watching it live, just letting people just cut the way they want to may just show a lot of things that aren't working. There was a thing where the LED wall broke while we were doing an event, and they just cut to a close-up and just stayed there, because if you looked at the wide, you saw that half of the screen was black. And so those are the kind of things that, so a lot of times the cutting is not just to give you a creative experience, it's to not show what isn't working.
That's a point well taken. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from David Paskin in Miami, Florida. And David asks, can someone please explain how to parse sensor size 1/1.28 inches, 1/1.5 inches? I don't know how to understand these phrases.
It's ratio time. Alex, you want to talk through it?
Yeah, it's just the basic 1/1 is a 1-inch sensor. 1/2 is a 1/2 is a 1/2-inch sensor, and then you're just looking at they're hedging these little sides. So 1/1.5 is halfway between the 1/2-inch sensor and the full size sensor. 1/1.28. So that they're measuring it in that frame, because I think part of the problem they have is that people wouldn't understand it if you said it was this many millimeters or this centimeter. Or the English units aren't accurate enough, and centimeters. Most Americans will be like, I don't know how big that is. And so, and usually they have it listed somewhere in millimeters is typically what you see. So there'll be a millimeter setting, which makes a lot more sense. And then there's this, but for Americans, we're going to give you this over inches and try to give you some variance that you can understand, that you can kind of get it. But what you want to think about is a 1/2-inch sensor is 1/2, and then anything less than that is going to be Anything more than that is smaller than that. So 1/3 inch, 1/4 inch is going to be, smaller than the 1/2 inch chip. And then anything, a lot of people are now, the 1/2 inch chip is starting to become kind of table stakes. It's not quite there yet, but I don't see in 5 years, we're not going to make any cameras that have sensors less than 1/2 inch, so there's a 1/2 inch is kind of becoming the thing. And then we're starting to move slowly. All of these are just shaving off edges to get to 1 inch.
Next question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeffrey asks, did anyone watch the State of Unreal Engine yesterday? And do they have any thoughts?
I didn't, but it's interesting. Nick Justitian from Drexel University hung out here for a good little bit of time. And I think he's coming back to do more later. And he really took a deep dive with all of us into Unreal Engine and how these metahumans work and things like that. It was really fascinating. It's also very complex. I remember at one point, Office Hours tried to have all of us do some experiments with creating our own metahumans. And it was really an amazingly complex process. We had varying degrees of success. I was on the low end of success with making a metahuman that had any resemblance to me in real life whatsoever. Other people did much better. It is a complex and fiddly process. So if they're continuing to evolve it, perhaps, fingers crossed, making it easier as a tool for the common person without a lot of time in it to succeed with, be a pretty exciting thing. Alex, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so some of the things that they showed off was foliage, a lot of foliage, and foliage is really hard to do in real time. So it's really hard to show that stuff. So having really dense foliage of forest and so on and so forth, was something that they're also being able to animate your metahuman with an iPhone. So being able to literally pick up your phone and start talking into it and have the metahuman get the animation is something that they're kind of tying, very deeply into that. We'll see how long it takes. I think it's supposed to come out this summer. And that would revolutionize a lot of things. So it'll be really interesting to see, how tightly that works. There's been other things, by the way, that have done this. I mean, that you can take an iPhone and connect it to Unreal, but being able to connect it directly to MetaHuman is really, really, really interesting. The Fortnite's Unreal editor, and you're starting to also see the creator economy that they're talking about, giving 40% back to of the net revenues back to the creators. And so I believe that that's 40% of all of Fortnite's revenue going back to the creators, which I think is a pretty smart move for them to do. And then they're building the marketplace under a brand called Fab. So you can see why they were fighting this fight with Apple, is because they're going to start doing things where they want to build a huge marketplace and they don't want to pay Apple 30% of that. so that's where but now you're more of that starting to hit the surface.
My hope for it, because it was fascinating technology when I was playing with it back when Office Hours was doing that kind of deep dive. It's just there was a lot of friction in the way of me getting results out of it. So as they continue to reduce the friction and make it easier for the average person to come in and use the tools, nothing more exciting than that. The idea and what's happening with Unreal Engine and all this is just one of the most fascinating parts of development. And I'm really looking forward to watching it as it continues to grow. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas asks, in February of 2022, the legendary rooftop concert by the Beatles was shown in IMAX theaters. Considering it was presumably recorded in monophonic sound only, would they have used AI source separation to upmix the IMAX format?
So this was a Peter Jackson passion project. The famed director of Lord of the Rings was given access to the vaults at Apple Corps or wherever, whoever had the rights to this stuff. And there were long and involved pieces I watched online about the processes they went through to really spruce up all the footage. It was originally shot in film cameras. The audio mix was different. A lot of the rehearsal footage they had to match. And so I would imagine that every state-of-the-art technique at the moment was put at Peter Jackson's disposal for this. I will say that I think I was fascinated by Get Back was the piece they made out of it. And it documents the recording of those songs in real time at the time it was happening. It's one of the things I've enjoyed most in terms of a behind the scenes look at how brilliant music is created by a group like the Beatles. And not only did I love it, but my wife was just absolutely enthralled. And she's a little bit younger than I was. And, she was a Beatles fan, but it wasn't the music of her life as the Beatles were for my life. And so we both were, I think, really engaged with this documentary because of the quality of the footage and its historical importance. One of the biggest bands of all time. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, so they may have. A lot of people are now starting to experiment with taking running tracks into a AI system and pulling out the vocals, pulling out a couple different instruments. I can't quite get to all of them, but 5 or 6 instruments, and then you can subtly start to move them around a little bit. It probably would have been pretty subtle. I believe that the Beatles were involved in the process, so they're going to be listening to it and making sure that it doesn't go too far. The other thing that a lot of times people do is they take that monophonic or even stereo and they add a little reverb that just kind of fills up the theater a little bit. That makes it feel a little bit more there. But I don't know exactly what they had there. I believe they actually had some multi-track from that actual piece. So I think that they don't have to be limited to monophonic. If they had the original, the original concert, I believe that they might have had all of those microphones and they could have moved it around a bit.
Chris?
The other thing to keep in mind is that although, George Martin was the genius behind a lot of the Beatles, his son, super smart too, and very much next generation Pro Tools. I saw the Beatles Love Show in Vegas, which George Martin's son did all the work on, which is fantastic. I'm not a Beatles fan. I never understood the allure to them. Sorry, I know that's sacrilegious to a lot of people, but what was amazing is seeing the Love Show. I knew the lyrics to every single word, even though every single song, even though I'm not a big Beatles fan. That's just how much it's ingrained in your head. And George Martin's son did amazing stuff of pulling things together from unlikely places and made the audio scape of that show in the theater in Vegas is fantastic. So there's a million things that you can do to enhance something and make it sound huge.
Yeah, if nothing else, just from a creative point of view, if you haven't seen Get Back, go search it out. It's on one of the streaming services, I think maybe Apple TV or something. It's just fascinating to see, a song that has become part of the human consciousness, literally globally. And you will see the 3 of them just hacking around in the studio, or 2 of them, or all 4 of them. And the idea that would eventually become the hook for one of the most successful pieces of musical art in all time just kind of appears, and you watch it form and be developed, and you watch them talking about it, and then it's just amazing. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Eric Billings, and Eric asks, has anyone explored the differences at a pixel level between camera-generated photos and AI-generated photos, similar to the analysis in Judge Dredd? I'd expect compression and algorithm artifacts to be reproducible and indicative of fakery.
Alex?
For now. Like when we look at it now, the bottom line is that sure, you can start to do that, but a lot of that stuff is going to be more and more harder and harder and harder to tell the difference between. So right now it's absolutely, you can look at something and go, oh, that's Midjourney or something like that, but that's not going to last for much longer.
Let's kick the next 2 questions out and get to the top of the hour. Next one.
Next question is from something popped under, from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. And Jack asks, in addition to my Insta360, I would like to upcycle my iPhone 6S and X-Ray for camera duty with my ATEM Mini Pro. Any opinions from the panel? Also, 6th generation iPad video pencil.
I'm not sure about up-resing. I mean, you can usually get video out through the iPhone Lightning to HDMI
and it's
adapter.
XR, not X-ray. Yeah, so XR. Oh. XR, yeah.
XR, okay. And so a lot of us use our iPhones in through an HDMI input to an ATEM. It works just fine. So I would think the 6th gen iPad would have the same capability. Alex?
Yeah, just make sure you're using the Apple Lightning to HDMI. So the OBSBot makes a converter that will turn get your Insta360 in there. You can't control it in the same way, but you can get the Insta360 in as a USB camera. The iPhones can be brought in with Lightning, but you got to use the Apple adapter. All the other adapters are just worthless. And then remember that you can share your Apple phone to an Apple TV, and it gives you a little wireless camera because it'll share to that. It'll screen share to that, and then you take the Apple TV and put it into the switcher.
Let's handle our last question, Filipe Baez.
Next question is from Filipe Baez in Prague, Czech Republic. And Felipe asks, I just received the invite to download the Arc browser. Anyone has any experience with it? If so, how do you like it? And what is or was your preferred browser before testing Arc?
I haven't heard of it. I don't see anybody who's nodding on here, so it may not. But if it's a competitive browser and it has potential, let's take a look at it. Oh, Alex, you want to comment?
I keep trying to move away from Chrome, but I'm having a hard time. So I've used Chrome for so long, mostly because we were doing so much stuff with Hangouts, and we it was hard because it was only the thing that tested. And every time I open something else, even Safari, I just get frustrated. Like I'm just like, oh my gosh, why is it so hard? I just want to drag something I just want to drag a bookmark into here, and no, you can't do that. So anyway, so I find that I keep on trying new ones. No, Felipe, what makes the Arc different? Is it
Well, according to them, it should free you up from your tabs. So they're moving the tabs from the top to the side and saying that list view is something that's more natural for people instead of the tabs on the horizontal on the top. It's a Chromium-based browser as well. But for example, my experience is I like using Safari, first of all, and I feel like I'm more immersed into websites with Safari because it almost doesn't have a toolbar. It's very thin. So I'm basically browser there, all website. And with the Arc, suddenly I have this extra thing on the side and it does a border around the website. And as soon as I open the browser, the fans on my M1 Max turned on. And right. I don't think that is a good sign.
Yeah, it's doing some work.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eye on it as we go. So it is the top of the hour, and that means we're turning our attention to our second hour topic today. And today we're talking about video interviews. And we're open for all things having to do with interviews. It's a big discussion, and it is, as I mentioned earlier in the opening for the show, one of the ways to generate content that is really pretty well known and understandable. But a lot of people dive into conducting on-camera interviews, and they have trouble because it can be an uncomfortable situation when you're starting out to understand, how do I engage? How do I ask good questions? How do I bring information out of the person that I'm talking to? And that I do it in the right way so that I don't end up having to work too hard to create the content that I'm looking for out of a long stream of consciousness interview with somebody. I always start out with, what are my goals for every interview? And the key goals for me is I want them to look natural. I don't want them to look forced. I want them to be informative. I want to get the information out of the person that the audience would most want to hear about. I want it to be engaging. In other words, I want it to look good and sound good and not have anything technically wrong with it. And then the last one that I always think about is that I'm always trying to find things that are what I call bite friendly. We generally don't use large sections of an interview unless the interview is the whole video you're making. You're looking for pull quotes and little sound bites that really help the audience understand. And so sometimes the art of interviewing is to try to get into that space where you get that good, sharp, capsulized quote that really does make a point. Every time Alex or I have talked about interviewing here, he comes back to, and I believe this 150%, preparation is everything when you're going to do an interview. And there's different kinds of preparation. You want the interviewee, the person you're talking to be prepped properly so that they understand what they're getting into. The interviewer, if that's you or someone who you're working with, has to be incredibly well prepped so that they understand what's going to be happening. You want to prep on the topic so that you kind of know some general things about what's going on. Then you get into the technical stuff. You want to prep the location so that you have a chance of getting good visuals and good auditory signals. And then those last two things, the video, your framing, your lighting, how your set is creating, and your audio to make sure that everything that's being said comes across clearly. Those are all critically important, and we'll talk about them all today. There's also a couple of other little things to think about. We talk a lot about using open-ended versus closed-ended questions in this. You don't want to give somebody a question on an interview situation where they can just go, nope, and that's it. That doesn't really successfully draw out your subject. I do have a list that we will talk about later if anybody is interested, of what I consider the 4 deadly sins of conducting an interview. This is my opinion after having done about 250 live interviews on camera over the course of my career. But other people have all sorts of things to add to this. I know Alex has done probably more than I have in this area. So Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're interested in covering today?
Yeah, I grabbed some frames from things that I like. So I figured not so much stuff that I've done, but things that that were on YouTube. So this will probably mean that you only get to experience this live because I'm going to show some pieces of things. We'll just kind of skip through them, but it'll probably be enough to get a flag. Sorry, Jeffrey. And so let's cut to a couple of them. One of the ones that I watch a lot is Errol Morris. So I mean, I study him a lot. So here you see him. He's experimenting a bit more with a frame here than typical. And I'll try to get my mouse to the right. There we go. And so let's take a look at. Let me take a look at this here. So what you're seeing here, what you want to look at is how much of this area he's actually giving away. And he does a couple different things here as you start to look at it. So he's got the soft background. The thing you always have to look at is weight. So what is he doing over here to weight this out over here? And so we'll talk a little bit about that framing, kind of as we move forward. Let me see if this will actually, yeah. So, and now he's doing this upshot, and you'll notice that he puts something in front. So this is something that what I will say is this is not the way to do a basic interview. This is a master doing what they know how to do and creating a feel. But one of the things that's really interesting in interviews when you can get it is to throw something right in front of the camera. And that's going to give you this kind of soft, like it gives you like you're somewhere and you're looking at someone through something, which I think is really, really interesting as you go there. And here you can see doing this. This is not something that I would do with a standard corporate one. This is something I do when I'm in control. So, having all this weight in the background behind her, and they're not keeping it the whole time that way. And so you can see him again showing these, and he's playing a lot, in that frame. But what you are noticing also is this, and I'll try to show some a little bit later. This is a massive source. So it feels like it's coming from a window, but this is mostly likely a minimum of a 4x4 that's right on the outside. And Filipe, you can interrupt as I'm talking.
All right. I wanted to just point out how beautifully composed this image is using the lines there. You have a line coming from her left side, the line on the top, and the line from the sofa that's perfectly aligned there with the horizon. And I think that brings up this composition so much to life.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The other thing about Morris and the way he does these types of interviews is you always have to look, you have to keep track of the number of cameras he's doing, because he would never have a primary angle be this or right. The shot with the inclusion. That's like camera 4
if you look at
5. This is probably at least, I'm going to say 5 angles. That's your primary angle, probably.
Right.
3, 4.
And we'll show another one here for a second. But anyway, and this is one of the things that's interesting is she's looking off frame. One of the things that when we go to this is Fog of War, and one of the great documentary to watch as far as just the art of putting this together. One of the things he does here is that eye line is right at you. This is actually, this is what he said he invented, but Courtney disagrees, the interatron approach to this whole process where he's looking through a teleprompter to the director. And when Errol Morris started doing this, it was literally like a video camera plugged into a video camera. Nowadays, we can do this through Zoom. We can do this. We usually try to put the person in the other room. In these ones, you can hear Errol Morris calling out because they're in the same room. They're looking at each other. We put people in other rooms, so you can't hear them talking to each other. But what you're seeing here is, I find this to be the most interesting view. And so even before Zoom and all the things that we did, I always really liked this interatron process. We had a client that really liked it, and so we just shot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos this way. And I find it to be much more compelling than off it. But again, fairly simple background that's out of focus. It doesn't compete with him too much. I'm not super fan of these verticals, but it's a simple background. It's about him, and you can see that they. And you can see how he's using lots of different ways of doing that. This is a really, really, you'll see Ken Burns do this. You'll see Aaron Morris do this on some things. It's not used for a lot of the interviews, but it's a very aggressive, cut their head off, thing. Generally, that will not be the only shot you do, but some people do. Some people will commit to this. And
that's
this is
usually the shot you do when somebody's guilty.
But I will say that you'll find, and now this is where you see this move, how has these moving there. A lot of people will sit there and lock off their camera to do these interviews. And what you really need when you're doing a close up like this, and in a lot of other cases, and you'll see this a couple times, when you see those camera moves, that is not a cheap tripod, and it is not locked off. That is a heavy tripod with a heavy head, with someone who knows how to use it, doing a soft move. The idea is to reframe him in a way that makes sense until we speed it up like this, you don't notice it. This is a little Dutch, which is a little, again. So now we're going to go, this is actually, the next one is why we decided to do this. We want to do the show was because of this episode here. Probably some of the best interviews that I've seen as far as just the pure technical capacity of these here. This is from Light and Magic. And this is what's interesting is that it's out of focus enough to not really be paying attention to it. This is a mixture of short depth of field, but it's also really big rooms. So this is something to look at. They created huge volumes. I think George was shot at the ranch. I think I recognize that room. A lot of the stuff was actually shot in the building that we work in. So in 3210 and the model shop across the street. And what they had were huge volumes to throw that background. The thing we want to learn there is we're throwing that background way into the background so that it drops off. The advantage of having a large volume, if you can get that, is that you can stop down so that the subject stays in focus, even if they lean in and out, but you still get that super soft depth of field. So you'll see this I didn't pull any frames from the social dilemma, but they did that. They had massive volumes, and they don't have to make everybody super short depth of field. Everybody's in focus. But these are all, as you look at all of these, in each one of them tells you where they're at. They're not using the same place to do an interview. They're going to a place that communicates that. So George is at the ranch. I don't know where this one is. These are pretty soft. This is down in LA, I think. And again, look at how they choose wide, short, they're making all of those decisions about, is this a waist up interview? Now, some of that you can do. Some people will say, well, I'll shoot a little wider I'll shoot a little wider and then I can always punch in, which you can do. The problem is if you shoot too wide, everything comes back into focus, and so you have to be careful of shooting wide. And that's where you really do want to stop, want to open up that aperture, try to get that short depth of field, because when you cut closer, the depth of field should shorten. And so it will actually feel a little like a jump cut when you go down that path. This is, and again, some of these are done in locations. Notice how this one's a little bit more in focus. And part of that reasoning for here, this is actually his office. So that he's actually, and so they're keeping a little bit more detail in. So look at how they're using that. And again, the thing you want to look at here is, let's see if I can get to a frame where you see it. One of the things that I do a lot is when I'm looking at a frame that I really like, I'm going to look at his eye. And the reason for that is your eye it's a reflector that tells you where all the lights were. so you can, if you grab that high res frame, I don't have the high res frame. If you grab the high res frame of someone's eye and you scale it up, it will show you where every light is in front of them and how they got lit that way. And so I use people's eyes all the time as a way to kind of reverse engineer what that looks like. But again, when you see this really soft, open area, this is a massive, it's at least 4 feet by 4 feet softbox, and possibly a couple of them to get that look. This isn't like a little 1x1 panel, that's gonna get that kind of frame. And so let's see here. Somehow there we go. Hold on. So, and here, again, the other thing is that you can just kind of throw things together. This is just they could have I'm sure that they just put this up and they probably knocked holes through here just to create something interesting. They probably just poked holes through it to get what they were looking for. I don't think this is probably not an existing stage. They probably set this all up, for that weight. And you see all these here, and we won't spend too much more time on this, but again, large, like if you look at his eye, that is a really, really big softbox that's probably right off camera, to get that kind of look. And what it does is it grabs all of this, but it's very forgiving. It gives you this nice soft look. It looks like it, by having the light over here, it looks like it's being generated from there. Again, very, very large space that they're working inside of. Anyway, and then as we go to this, I think this might be the last one here. This one, what I thought was interesting is they just let this all blow out. Let me change color. They let this all blow out here. So they really wanted to capture all of that there. But again, 60 Minutes does this all the time. They'll cut this and they shoot it that way, and that's the only camera they have. They've got a wide camera that is capturing. You'll see all the shots here, I think. So here's his interview back. And there's their kind of wide master that they're doing there. And they may have another one. So they may have, if you think of the two of them there, they have one that's going close up here, one that's going close up here. They'll typically cut him a little wider, and then they'll cut him off with the return because it makes it more intense for him. And then they have this one. This one is the one you're seeing right now, and they may have another one over there to capture those pieces. But the other thing to remember is that they didn't just put them by the window. There's at least you can see a reflector down below him, and they probably have another reflector over here that's bouncing that light. They wouldn't use a light here because they probably couldn't generate enough light to keep up with the sun. So typically you'll use a reflector they're using that to fill him in here. And then this is what I thought was interesting about this was that they're doing an interview that really captures him and captures where he's at. And then they get into close-ups, so they kind of want to show you him in his environment. This is probably, my guess is probably his house. They're trying to kind of, keep him. And then the other thing I'd say there is that this shows you the importance. A lot of people, this shows you the importance of having a second camera. So having that second camera is not just to get another angle, it's to cut around things. So you need to be able to cut around the things that you're looking at. Like I need to cut from this place to this place, and I need another angle to get to. So I'm sure that right there they cut to something else that was there. And you can see here, this is what I was talking about before. When he cuts close up, that depth of field changes dramatically, and you want to be conscious to it that shouldn't be the same. That's why you can't just shoot wide and punch in all the time for a lot of those things to look at. So hopefully that generates some questions, at least to look at that, and from kind of a technical perspective of thinking about how we do this. I spend a lot of time, I admit, studying other people's documentaries. When I think about how I'm lighting those things and how I'm putting those together, I really focus a lot on analyzing those interviews and analyzing what people are doing, so that I can there's no reason for me to reinvent the wheel. I look at the things that I like. I watch a lot of documentaries. I keep the ones that I'm the most interested in, and usually try to reproduce those over time.
So if you're trying to create some of these, it's good to understand that even in the ones, we saw a lot of low key lighting and a couple of examples of higher key lighting. This is an example of a higher key kind of circumstance. And even though it looks much better illuminated than some of them, and even though it doesn't have a ton of depth of field behind the subject, it still handles the original ideas of lighting, which is a key light side, a fill side, and some sort of backlight or separation side. In this particular case, the key and the fill are not distinctly different, but they are there. You're seeing that one side of her face has a substantially higher light than the other side of her face. And the rules of traditional three-point lighting, even if you don't use them in every interview, I could break out on everything that Alex showed where they are using the idea of backlight is separation, key light is where they want you to focus most of your attention, and a fill light to bring up whatever is in shadow. Even in the ones that are highly dramatic, it is very seldom that there is no detail in there at all. This is an example of something, and Alex, and we may talk a little bit about it, if you want to bring up any kind of subjects, and Alex was already kind of deconstructing the lighting grid by what you see. And it is quite possible to do. When I saw this thing, I thought, okay, well, this isn't really Rembrandt. It's the highlight on her left apple of her cheek is at a really extreme angle. And one of the things I always look for when I'm trying to figure out how did somebody light a shot that I like, where are the shadows falling and what are they shaped like? And in this particular case, the key light on her left side is at a pretty extreme angle. So you've got a pretty deep shadow under her nose. And if you look at the shadow that her nose is casting, it's up high. It is far to the right. That is a little bit of an unusual angle. You don't see that too often. It really does pop her cheek up, though. And because she is such a positive looking person, it emphasizes the aesthetics of what you may be trying to get out of the person. It emphasizes their personality. You light something when you're talking about something serious in a different way that you'd light something where you're promoting a product and you want everything to be seen. So there's a lot of aesthetics go into this as well. Let's go on to
I was going to show one more thing real quick as we go through it. The just to give you a sense, a lot of times these things look relatively simple, and you think that they're all there. This is just a behind the scenes of a shot that, something that we did a while ago. And if you look at it, that's what oftentimes these things kind of look like. So we have a very large source here that's on the subject. We've got a couple shotgun mics. We've got a backup shotgun mic here. This is both a fill as well, a little very subtle fill, as well as it was too reflective here. We also have some more fill back here that's going on. And then we have the teleprompter that's here and our monitor that we can look at. And so, a lot of times things look very simple, and I think this is always the thing that we try to have people get is that, you look at a TikTok and it looks like a simple setup, and oftentimes it is, rarely as simple as it looks. Here's another one from the same shoot, but you'll see a lot of light. We have reflectors here. We have, a lot of times we have grids that we're building out. And these, rarely is it just a little camera with a little light. And that's why a lot of us, when someone says, well, I have like one of these little lights, or they're selling these little 1x1s, those aren't things that those are news gathering lights, unless you put a whole bunch of them together, they're not going to capture the kind of images that you see when you see most interviews. These are very large, 2x2, 4x4 size lights to get the kind of lighting that you're expecting out of them.
Interesting. Let's go into our first question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeffrey asks, using lighting in the eyes is great, but could some start using CG to alter the look, similar to movies where crew gets tracked out of sunglasses?
Alex?
Changing the lighting is hard. You can do some changes and you can do some things there. Generally, when we're doing those interviews, we don't want to spend a ton of time in post. The interviews, because they're such long form and because you're working through them and you're cutting to those, you want to do as little post on them as possible. So you want to capture almost everything in frame. Now, some people will use, CG background. So a lot of stuff when you see like DVD extras, they're shooting in front of green screen, and you'll notice that the keys are really bad and the stuff doesn't look great. And there's a lot of things that just aren't that compelling about that. And so one of the things that's important there is that if you're going to shoot something in front of green screen, you're going to want to really get the lighting to look really great on the person, treat it like a regular lighting setup, but you have to measure everything. So you measure your camera position, you measure the focal length, you measure the focus distance, you measure all of those things so that if you build a CG background behind it, it can match all the focal lengths, zoom settings, everything else, and focus settings, so that it blends in. Putting a flat background behind people, all the behind the scenes for Fellowship of the Ring, not that I'm bitter, is not a great way to have it really feel compelling or feel like it's important. It just feels a little cheap. So so the main thing is that you want to look at how do you do that. So that's where you can add CG. Correcting people, changing their lighting is it might cost the cost of your entire documentary to do a couple clips. So it's taking things out of sunglasses is one thing. Relighting people is a pretty stiff thing to approach.
Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Mark Giuliani in Washington, D.C. And Mark asks, when recording or streaming an interview on sets like Sunday morning talk shows, do you want to coach the guests to look at the host or the camera when answering questions?
That's a choice that you're going to make depending on how much engagement you want. It's a tradition for a long time that you had the interviewee slightly off camera and they looked across the frame. And then if you were cutting back to the interviewer, it was a matching angle. And so it applied that the two were talking to each other and you were looking on at that interview from a little to the side. Because of Zoom and because of what we're doing, more and more of what is happening is more direct into the camera. We're getting much more used to that these days. Alex, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I think that Zoom is really kind of taken that over the shoulder shot and it just feels very old now. Like the looking off camera to me feels like a very old cut. So I tend to not do that anymore. And I tend to give them a teleprompter. One thing that's interesting about folks that we learned, and I've probably, since my business used to just be doing interviews, I've probably done a couple thousand interviews in the last 15 years. And probably less than 100 have been off camera. So like literally almost all of them have been, because once I got used to the once I got used to the interatron style, which was long before COVID, it was probably 15 years ago, it's just really hard to go back. It's really hard to go back to someone looking off camera. It's still popular and established folks will do it. But it's kind of, when I see it now, I feel like it's very old fashioned. And so that's kind of my thought around it. But that has changed over time. I mean, we did do it in the earlier days, but I find that looking straight at the camera now the thing is if you just have them if you direct them to look at the camera, you won't get a great performance. So if you don't have a teleprompter that you can do an interatron process, have them look at you, because the problem is that your facial expression affects how they talk. There's people who you'll notice that there's some people who you'll tell everything to, and some people you won't tell anything to. Like some people you just kind of crumple up and you find, why do I always stutter? And why do I don't say the right things? And I'm off, I feel off balance. And there's some people that you feel like you can tell your life story to. It's because of how they're reacting to you while you're talking. And so the thing is that when they react, when they're nodding, when they're excited, when they're pulling it out, when they're like Sky, you just want to talk to them the whole time because there's something that pulls you out of that thing. When they're flat, when they're looking down at the notes for the next question, when they're doing all these other things, that puts you in a box and you feel like you just want to stop. And so that nonverbal communication between the interviewer and the interviewee is super important. And a lot of people take it for granted and they don't get as good at interviews. That's why if you're going to do direct to camera, you do want to invest in the teleprompter. You have another teleprompter. You're looking at each eye to eye, and you'll even see their eyes converge differently when they see someone on the other side. And so it really makes a huge difference if you don't direct someone to look into a camera unless they can see someone on the other side.
I agree with that 100%. Those were some of my deadly sins of getting out of the interview as the interviewer and looking at your notes constantly rather than engaging with the person. Yeah. Almost always the quality of the interview results you come up with has to do with engagement between you and the person you're talking to.
Yeah, to what you're saying there, it is so important for people to feel important. And if when they feel important, they'll talk more, they'll be more excited. They'll be like, I think I've mentioned this before, but we have a director that I've used for a lot of interviews, probably hundreds of interviews at this point. And the first thing he does, he walks in and he just he walks in and he goes, "Wow, you look so much better in real life than you did on the photos." Like that I got to, to prep this, you look great. And he just starts that out. And at first I thought, wow, he's he really liked that person. After a while, I realized that's just what he does. Like that's how he starts the thing. But he's super personal, and he's super just kind of talking to them and making them feel. You can just see he can take anybody and bolster them up so that they feel excited about it. It doesn't matter whether he agrees or disagrees with them or anything else. He's just building them all up, and then they're going to say a lot more things. They're going to be more energetic. They're going to have more energy. And you can cut that however you want later. But you want to, and that's one of the problems is, and some people want to put people make people feel uncomfortable, so they do that on purpose. But for most of the interviews we want, even if we don't agree with the person, we want them to be excited while they're talking. And so the key is to kind of build that out.
Absolutely agree with that, and also just not to try to get too much into the interview. One of the most powerful questions I ever asked in an interview, and I learned this from watching a trial on TV, is just the simple, what happened next? It's 3 words. That's all sometimes that you need in order to bring someone out and have them expand on something, as opposed to, well, you said this and you said that, and there's another thing. Right. And then it's just, you can lose an interview because your question is too complex and takes them out of the moment, right, rather than engaging with what they just said and having them expand on it.
And that's a great point. One of the things we actually call it direct and cross when we do interviews. So a direct in the legal cases, you can't lead anybody on. You just have to say what happened next, and then what happened, and then what, and then you ask open-ended questions that don't lead the witness. A cross is, isn't it true that you did this? Isn't it true that you did that? And that's the second person that comes on to interview the witness. And we try to instruct people who are doing the interviews to think of that as a positive. At first, ask them open-ended questions that just have them explain things. Say the question should be short. It should be open-ended. It should let them just roam around, and you're just gathering information. Oftentimes for a corporate event, we need them to say certain things. So then at the end, we get them, well, can you talk about this in more detail? Can you say that slightly differently? So we'll dig in and try to get the things that, somebody wants in corporate for them to come out. There's words they want them to come out of their mouth, and you got to get as close as you can to that. But do not ever do that at the beginning. You will destroy your interview. So what you need to do is, at the very beginning, is you just have the open-ended questions that just gather the information that lets them, that's going to be all the stuff you use. And then there'll be like 2 seconds, 3 seconds here and there that you use of the other stuff, because it's never very good.
Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeffrey asks, thoughts on Shaky video interview cameras, especially those that are added to the shot afterwards?
Yeah, we all laughed about that as the MTV style. Back in 20 years ago, they started doing that, where instead of being on tripods, they wanted the energy, the youthfulness of a camera moving around all the time. A good camera person can pull that off and have it be a combination of not looking locked down and static, but still keeping in frame what is important. And a little bit of action kind of creates a more sense of you are there and moving around a little bit. I think they're both, I'd never say no to any style. The question is, does the person doing it, can they do it effectively? Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple things to that. One thing around that is that, number one, if you're not, I hate adding it later if I don't have to. Like, it's really a bummer to add that later. Remember that you have to add motion blur back to it. So if you're going to start doing post camera shake, there was motion blur there, and you're going to need to recalculate that to really do it properly. Otherwise, it looks weird. The other thing is that the best way to add camera shake is to take a target about 20 feet away, zoom in on it with a real camera, and then just capture some footage. You can't keep it still, at 20, 30 feet zoomed all the way in. It'll move, but it'll move organically. What you're capturing when you do that is that you're capturing the linkages between your hand and your elbow and your shoulder. You're capturing your breathing. You're capturing all kinds of things that are human, and you'll get this little bit of just movement. You take that, you track it, you apply that track back to your footage, and it'll look much more organic than just taking the center point and animating it around. So it's a much better way to kind of grab that organic feel. So I would try to avoid it as much as you can. I feel like you're working too hard when you start adding camera shake back to the system. But remember that if you do add camera shake, use something that's going to capture an organic camera shake. And then the second thing is to make sure that you add that motion blur to make it kind of blend back into the system.
And often these days, we're blessed in that we can get a hold of things like these little Osmos and other gimbal things that'll allow you to get kind of a handheld look and still a relatively stable shot that doesn't look like it's really jerking. So, Shaky Cam at one point was really, truly active. The middle ground is these gimbals that allow you to feel organic and in motion without a lock-off shot. And the lock-off is the third piece. And, don't dismiss any of them. You were looking at those Errol Morris interviews and things like that. Those were lockdown shots, but they're still brilliant. You can do all of them really well, and you can do all of them really poorly. Next question.
Next question is from James Brook, and James asks, what do you think of the interview trend in TV interviews that occasionally cut to the very wide scene that show the cameras and the lighting setups?
BTS shots. Alex?
Well, I like it. I think it's cool. I mean, definitely as someone who does interviews, I love it. I like, I see what they did there, and you can learn a lot from those. And so I think that I enjoy it. I think that, pulling that back a little bit is a great way to do it. You just have to shoot it well. Make sure that you're planning it. It's not someone just like behind the scenes shot. A lot of people now do those BTSs. They're very valuable also for web content. So what you do is you maybe only put a hair of that into a real one, but you tell people to see more. You can see the web, and then the web, you show a ton of it, and it gives you a different view of the same thing, which adds value to that content on multiple platforms.
It's just amazing to me. When I first started out, I remember it was probably 15, maybe 20 years ago, the first time a senior vice president at a corporation looked at me and says, when are you going to shoot the B-roll? I said, why do you even know that term? Because it wasn't common 20 years ago. Today, almost everybody, because they've become much more media literate, understands this process. And so behind the scenes, I think, is really satisfying for an audience because everybody feels like they're a little bit part of it. They know how the soup's being made. Next question.
Next question is from JJ Mukana in San Rafael, California. And JJ asks, where could one place a webcam like a Logitech Brio or the Insta360 to get the short depth of field?
Alex, your thoughts?
In a really, really, really large space. So it's still a 1/2-inch chip. Eventually things will go out of focus. I mean, it doesn't keep everything in focus. So if you put it on one side of a big stage, let's say, and you put the person there and they're really close to you and there's nothing behind you. But if you get 20 or 30 feet, you're going to get something that looks nice and out of focus if you don't have anything in the foreground. So you can do it with any camera. It's just a matter of just how far you have to go to get there.
Yeah, and also the aperture is going to determine some things about depth of field. So if it's got an automatic one, if you can shoot in less light, open the aperture up, you will get less depth of field. It's really hard to do outside in a baseball stadium or something like that. You got the iris as closed down as possible. You're going to have the maximum amount of depth of field, and you may not be possible to do it at all. Next question.
Next question is from Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. And Craig asks, when doing a remote interview, when is it worth the trouble to use more than a single camera, such as an interatron camera and a wide established camera?
Alex?
We rarely do that. So we rarely, when we're doing a remote interview, we're going to usually lean on B-roll. So some kind of B-roll, other things that they've done, other things that they're working on. The reason for that is that generally it overwhelms the person that you're sending it to. Now, if you have a team to do it, we shoot them all the time. So if we have a team for a remote interview and I'm sending 1 or 2 people to that person's house, I'm doing a setup, I will always set up that second camera to grab onto that if I have someone to manage it. But if I'm sending it to an individual who is not a video professional, who has to get this all set up, it's bad enough that I have to set up the first camera, let alone the second camera. They'll run out of energy and then just be frustrated. So if you have a team there to do the remote interview, and we've done more and more of this where you're sending a team out, they get it all set up, and then the interviewer is somewhere in the world talking to them. And it's really changed. For a while, we had clients who really wanted to travel, so they wanted to go to all the interviews. But over time, the travel, the excitement of the travel wore off, and they started just saying, "Can we just set up Zoom or Skype or whatever?" So they can just sit in their office and do all the interviews for people, and it's a really great way to do it.
Next question.
Next question is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris asks, facial hair to me can be tricky to light. What's your rule of thumb for bushy facial hair to minimize shadows, large diffusers or small direct facing spots?
Alex?
Large diffusers, like for facial hair, large diffusers, fill. That's what's going to make all of that generally work a lot better. In general, when in doubt on an interview, large sources are your friend.
Amen to that. Next question.
Next question is from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. And Gordon asks, when shooting multiple interviews in different locations for the same show, should you attempt to keep the lighting theme the same for each, or light for what looks best in each location?
Again, another judgment call. Are you trying to get everybody in? I've shot for things like PowerPoint presentations where I knew people were going to be on one side. I was going to be using half the shot. And I want those to be similar person to person, understanding that I'm going to cut away from and back to them as support for other content. I've also done exactly the opposite. I shot half my interviewees looking right and half my interviewees looking left, so I can vary the presentation in the design of the presentation for the audience. You really do have to break down each thing and decide, where are you going with this interview? What are you trying to do? Is visual variety more important to you in this particular use case, or is it less important? And consistency will let people concentrate on the complex diagram on the right of the screen and just have the person there as the expert describing that complexity. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, if we look at this again, here's exactly what you're asking about. So you're seeing with each one of them, the framing there is a warm look that they're using for all of these. So there is a feel to them, but every frame is depending on what they want to show behind it. But you'll notice that there is a color palette that they're using behind every person. And there is a general rule of, these large sources, but which side, how close, what they're doing is all. And I will say, just to go back to this, to me, that Lighting Magic, beyond being just a really great documentary, is a master course in interview lighting and interview setup and interview framing. It's the best I've ever seen.
Next question.
Next question is from JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California. And JJ asks, when Alex is wearing glasses, his eyes are still well lit. Where are the lights placed to prevent shadows?
Lighting glasses. Alex,
I don't have one right now, so I know. I'll throw over here. I can. Hold on. They're missing an arm, so my glasses broke. That, if you're wondering why I don't have glasses on, is the little arm broke. But if you see them here, I have it at about a 45-degree angle up, and it literally, how I figured that out for my glasses is the way you have to figure it out for interviews. It's angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. So anyway, it's just a simple problem. I have a light here, and I have a person here, and I have a camera here. Basically, I want to, I have to figure out where does that light hit the glasses that's going to go off of that's going to go into that frame. And I just keep moving the light up until that angle of reflection just barely misses the lens. And so you're just moving it until it disappears. But it really is, it's a very simple math that it's always going to come out. And you can kind of look at something and go, well, my camera's here and the light has to be, and you can kind of get within a couple degrees without even looking at it. And then when the person sits down, then you start playing around with it. The other things, big sources help, because the other problem you have is that when you start lifting that up, some people with protruded, you'll be fixing the glasses and then suddenly their eyes drop into shadow. And so that's why really large sources help you. And then you just get it out of range, but you still can keep most of the face.
And for those of you who didn't misspend your youth in pool halls or billiard parlors, angle incidence of angular reflection is a good way to describe how a pool ball hits a rail and comes off of it. So that'll help you. There's a reason that you can deduct some of your time in the pool hall. You're studying lighting.
Physics.
Right. Next question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. Thoughts on interviews where the company logo is framed in the shot, making the interviewee small and insignificant?
Well, you never want to make your interviewee look small and insignificant, although I have had a ton of decision makers from there saying, can we get our logo any larger and things like that? I will say it is a bit of a risk if it's an interview for the short run, but I've also had interviews that were supposed to be for fundamental videos that were going to last the company 5 or 10 years. And then sure enough, they changed the logo and all of the things where that is a primary factor in the shot become obsolete. So it's a little dangerous, Alex.
Yeah, I will admit that I hate framing any frames that take into account the background that much, other than if it's like a great scene. But if you're trying to keep a logo in, if you're trying to keep the sign on the front of the podium, if you're doing all those things, you oftentimes undermine the feel of it. And I think you're absolutely right, Jeffrey, that it makes the person feel small and less insignificant or less important because you got all this other stuff around them that you're trying to kind of build up. And so I want to frame that person so that they look great. They're framed great the way I want. And then I build the frame around them. And if we need to put the logo in there, we can. We've definitely done that. Usually when people start talking about logos, I really want to do a green screen because then I can just stick the logo wherever I want later and kind of frame it just the way I want it. So that's one thing to think about. I also love using CG ahead of, as a little lower third, like, hey, we can put it in later as a bug or fly something in there. And so that we don't have to spend as much time dealing with it on set. I don't think it's great, but there are definitely reasons that you do it. Like a slightly wider shot for a politician, you may want to have a QR code or a logo or something on either side of them. But I would, recommend, getting that kind of more build the shot around the person first and then figure out where you're going to put the graphics.
It's getting a little easier as we get more and more resolution because you can do some limited punch-ins. So you can.
The hard part is that you have to take into account that people are watching on their phone. So you can do that, but you have to think about if you can't read it at 640 by 360, you probably shouldn't put it in there.
Point well taken. Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, when shooting an interview with user-generated questions sourced from a platform like Mukana, for example, how would you feed the questions into the teleprompter display?
Alex?
There's actually a teleprompter display in Mukana. You don't see it very often as users, but we use it all the time, and so we can change not only we can flip the text in the browser, we can scale it up and scale the questions down. We can do a lot. We have a lot of control over what it looks like in the teleprompter. And so, there's a teleprompter view that we use. So that's how we drive those into it. Typically, though, we still want someone to read it to an interviewee as opposed to having them try to read the question off of the teleprompter. But if we're doing it where the interviewer might be in front of that teleprompter, throwing those up and keying those in is pretty effective.
Next question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeffrey asks, are there any rules of thumb when using a slider, vertical, horizontal, or at an angle?
Alex?
Most of the sliders are horizontal. You're going to move them back and forth horizontal. One thing to remember is that you're moving them back and forth. One thing that you want to remember is that as you move that, they can move in and out of focus. So if you're not having a camera operator doing it, or if you're not having a good camera operator do it, remember that oftentimes has to be kind of at a semicircle. So it's kind of a curved piece. Otherwise, because then you can get the focus and that person stays in focus. There is a Red Rock makes a piece called the One Man Crew. And a lot of times we use that as for a lot of our interviews in the past, we used that as a second camera, and it just bounces back and forth. But what it would do is give us a little bit of motion, and everybody stays in focus if you get it at the right distance. You kind of have to figure the distance out so that it's basically at the point where it needs to be in that curve. So I think it's about 6 feet or something like that from the person, and then it just bounces back and forth. So you had that second shot with it kind of moving there, and a lot of times we use that shot. We would have that going back and forth. We'd still have a second camera operator capturing close-ups, capturing their hands, capturing other things like that. But what it freed them up to do is have that camera bouncing back and forth, be able to go more aggressive with the pickup shots, and then still have your master shot. So cameras are generally less expensive. So being able to put more of them in doing something is a great way to add value without adding a lot of cost.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas asks, what special considerations are needed for video depositions for court cases over traditional interviews?
Well, that's a very formal way to do interviews. And you're got all sorts of restrictions in any kind of legal proceeding. The judge is going to control how things can be done. There are certain standards you have to follow. People who specialize in legal videography really have taken extra training to make sure that they understand not just the requirements of the law, but courtroom decorum, courtroom etiquette. You have to understand who can speak and who can't speak and when and what's next and how things flow. It is a very structured system because it needs to be fair and consistent for everybody who encounters that system. Alex, you want to?
Yeah, you have to be careful. Like in courtroom, it's funny. You want to make it look prettier, but making it prettier usually gets a lot more objections. And so what you want to be careful of is we want to do a basic camera. You're locking it off typically. You're gathering that information, but you want to be careful of trying to push it too far. Because everything that you do to add quality, or like a short depth of field, it's a good example. Those kinds of things can all open it up for the opposing side that doesn't want to have it there, saying, "Well, they framed it in a certain way that is not," or anything that's, dramatic lighting. All those things you have to take into account. You want it to be as flat and as basic as possible, and you need to be able to hear it and see it real well. But you have to be very careful of making it artistic, because artistic will open you up to all kinds of challenges.
We are down to the last couple of questions here. So if you have additional questions, that'd be great. If not, maybe I'll go back through my 4 sins things and we'll talk about those a little bit. Maybe they'll generate a few more questions. We're getting close to the end though here. Let's go to one more question.
Last question possibly the last question is from Jeffrey Powers. Can Filipe Baez talk about coloring interviews? Is there a style guide different from making a show or a movie?
Filipe?
Well, I think that really depends. If we're talking about, for example, a documentary or documentary series, or if we're talking about commercials, right, or just corporate, there are 3 things normally that I see happening very frequently, including in my projects, is time, money, and audience. So time and money will dictate a lot of how everything is going to be done, including if that color grading will happen within the NLE in which was edited, or if it's going to be turned over to a colorist on a separate system, because that makes it more complicated. You have turnovers that you have at that point, and that costs a lot of money. And then the audience, obviously, what are the feelings you want to evoke from that audience? Because this may educate if the creative style of your interview, if you're going to go from naturalistic to filmic, for example. But I am not a colorist, so this is just from the producing and editing point of view that I have.
Nice. All right. Let me run through these real quick and see if they generate a few more questions. When I was thinking about this, I really do think, and I've developed this through the 200 or 300 interviews I've done live, my 4 sins of things that you don't. The first is the lack of preparation. If you don't understand the topic, if you don't know the subject, if you don't know your goal, what you're trying to get accomplished in the interview, and if you don't know any limits that you're supposed to have. And they come up occasionally when somebody says, please don't ask me about this. It will shut down an interview if you make a mistake and go into an area that you really shouldn't have. It'll take your subject entirely out of things. My second sin, and we talked about this, is asking compound or complex questions. And boy, I had trouble with this when I was learning how to interview. That clear, simple question that lets them answer, and that guides them. What happened next? Why did that help? Why do you think that didn't work well? Those really do engage an interviewee and help them, as opposed to I've got 3 sentences to frame my question. And we see that a lot, by the way, in some of the news shows, and it drives me nuts when they have 4 questions held up there. Interviews are often stressed, and adding too much information really stresses them more. So simplify whenever you can. The third sin that I think is making it all about you, thinking that your clever question is as important as the interview. It is never. I believe in empathy over inquisition. I hate showboating. And I've discovered over the course of time that truly respect builds rapport between you and an interviewee. So if you show them that you are there to help them look their best, that goes a long way in settling an interviewee down and getting a really good, useful conversation. And, it's the 4th on my list, but it's probably number 1, an important failure to listen during your interview. If your next question is less important than the subject's current answer, virtually always, and I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm doing an interview. Interviewees are living, flexible people. These are living, flexible discussions to be guided, and they are not a timed test. I've got 10 questions that I developed for this interviewee. I'm going to get through all 10 of them, regardless of what they say, is probably the worst possible way to approach getting your list of questions together for an interview. We have a question or two that have come in since then. So, Alex, next question.
Next question is from Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. Beyond the ILM doc, what is a good source for learning more?
Filipe has a thought. So does Alex. Filipe.
I personally love this style from Masterclass. Masterclass has very nice shots there with their teachers.
And the thing to know is Masterclass four walls almost everything. So they basically build sets. So that they're never, the thing about Masterclass that you should know is that when you watch them, that is never someone's house or their kitchen or their whatever. They're building a set. And they are, to exactly everything you see there is a set. And it's almost everything, not everything, but almost everything, no matter how real it looks, was generally built in a soundstage. And that lets them have immense control over the lighting, over the framing, it's because it's all designed around that. And I do agree with Filipe. It is a master class on framing and shooting, especially, those types of things. Yeah.
Next question. Oh, I'm sorry, Alex. Yeah, that's yours. So next question.
Next question is from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeffrey asks, influential interviews you review when you prepare for an interview gig.
Alex, what do you go to?
I will say that I kind of prepare all the time. So if I'm going there, I will be constantly, every time I see an interview and I go, oh, that was really nice. I keep track of it. That's why I was able to grab all these interviews that I liked, because they're all kind of sitting around on my hard drive. Maybe not all edited together, but I keep a lot of them around to look at things. And so I'm thinking about it all the time. Anytime something pops out to me in an interview that I go, oh, I really like that, or I really don't like that, I at least take mental note of it. And so I'm kind of working on it all the time to get better at it. The other thing I will say is that I hire great DPs. so when I do it, usually the people that I work with, whether it's Brent By or my brother or a couple other folks, I hire people that are really good at this. And so I'm only making fine adjustments to someone who really knows what they're doing.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Michael Smith in Silverado, California. And Michael asks, has anyone seen Babylon? It shows a transition from silent to talkies.
I've heard about it. I have not yet got a chance to see it. And it'd be interesting to go back and see their take on those days when sound was coming in and everything changed. We've heard a lot of stories about actors who were really huge in the silent era, and they just couldn't make the change to talkies for any one of a number of things. So it changed the paradigm. It'll be interesting. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to someday watching it. Next question.
Next question is from Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. And Eric asks, is it worth pursuing reluctant interviewees, or do they usually result in a bad show?
Alex?
Definitely not always. Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of people. They don't do it very often. And if you can, you just have to be a really good interviewer. So I think that the issue to get a good show out of it if you can get into the house or into the building or get them to come meet you somewhere, oftentimes you can actually get a great interview out of them. But it really that's where the true skill of a great interviewer that's going to make them feel comfortable. Now, the other thing to remember is one thing that we think a lot about is when you're building that interview, we didn't really talk as much about it. You're building a cocoon for that experience, for that process. And you really want to be, things looking all kind of cobbled together and wires hanging everywhere and everything else. It makes your interviewee feel uncomfortable. And when they feel uncomfortable, they give bad interviews. And so the place where they get to sit, the place where they're going to change, the place where you do hair and makeup, the things that you do, all of those things matter. They're not just something that, you can kind of work it out. And people, when they get started, they start to work that out. But how you end up doing really high-end interviews is you get really good at all of those little creature comforts, the temperature of the room, the kind of food that you want to ask them ahead of time. If you can get them to show up, what kind of food do they want? What do they want? A water? Do they want Coke? Do they want a coffee? How do they have their tea? How do they do those things? Is there any snacks that they would like to have? These are all things that you want to kind of try to pull together if you're really doing a high-end interview, because it makes a huge difference in how they feel. And then when they feel more comfortable, and then you have a great person in front of them, it definitely improves the quality of the event.
Thank you all, one and all. We really appreciate this. Don't forget tomorrow, Altheon IO. It's just kind of a service like Frame.io, but they do cloud content management portals. We'll be talking to Matt Samaglia of that. Saturday, the class reunion, 3-year anniversary of being here on office hours to help you. So we're looking forward to that. Sunday, of course, introspection. There's a few things on the schedule. The panelist meeting will be happening in the next couple of days. So if you're interested in that and want to be part of the panel, please do. And in fact, our thanks to the panelists, everybody who showed up here to help us put the show on. We could not do the show without these brilliant panelists that we bring in every day. Also, the behind the scenes crew, which is amazing. And watch the credits roll at the end of this, and you'll see all the names of the people who are helping us. And of course, you for asking questions and being a part of this. Remember that After Hours is always open for your questions or comments 24/7. We've got a lot of things coming up on the office hours schedule. Our NAB coverage is something we're really looking forward to. And if you want to be more involved in that, there's a way to find out. Just go to the website and you'll see pieces of how to get involved in that. All of these things are part of the Office Hours family, and we appreciate your time every day when you come here to Office Hours and help us make this a part of a process where we're really trying to pass on as much useful information as we can to everybody. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. So thanks for watching. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Is it a MacBook Pro?
It is.
I've noticed that the fan blades have gotten so close together that you just have to open up the case every once in a while and blow them out.
Yeah, Mickey suggested I do that. For some reason, I took the screws out, but I didn't feel like prying it off. I didn't think I knew enough about how to get the bottom of the case off. I'm going to have to go to